Well, again, welcome to the first Lunch and Learn. This one's called Foundations for Success. We want you to have a good, solid foundation to build on in terms of your nutrition and your movement and your understanding of your own body so that you'll know how to take care of it. It struck me as I was getting ready for this talk that most of us probably know more about our cars and our VCRs and all these in our computer. You know, we know about all these other things in our lives, and we don't know that much about our own self, and that's the most important thing. So that's what we're going to do today. At the end, we'll give you a total on the weight loss to date, and we'll have a chance for some of the sharing on successful goals achieved or obstacles to goals achieved. We won't have time for everybody to share that, but we do want those cards turned in so that we have a better idea, again, how to help each of you. What I'd like to start with for the medical part of the talk is this is a map that was in the New England Journal of Medicine about a year and a half ago, and it's showing heart disease death rates starting from age 35 and up in our country, with the highest rate, of course, being the brown, and you see right where we are. I mean, the Mississippi Delta, Mississippi Valley is just loaded with disease. It's interesting, if you look down here, the number of counties in the country, pretty evenly split up, 600 counties in each of those categories. Our goal as the Right Clinic, our goal as the corporate wellness program is to have a nice big white target starting in Memphis and spreading out. And you guys are a part of that. We've already heard some of the success stories that you have. But this is what our country's up against. This is why healthcare is so expensive. This is why people are dying. And that's what we have to combat. We talked in our opening kickoff meeting about the fact that 50% of us in this room are likely to die from a heart attack, from a stroke, or from diabetes complications. Now, that 50% statistic is just a statistic. It's a prediction, but we can change that prediction. That's what we're all about. It does not have to be that way. Without a doubt, it doesn't have to be that way. Part of what we're doing, just to give you a big picture, is we know about the unhealthy behaviors that lead to the health risks, that lead to the diseases, that lead to the costs. And the costs are just staggering. And that really doesn't even put a number on the cost of losing one view. What does that cost to your family, to your neighborhood, to your church, to your company? And we can't put a number on that. So we're going to break this change. It does not have to be that way. In our one-on-one talks, each of you had a chance to see this diagram, but I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes with it again to remind you of the what's and the whys. We know that family history and food choices and exercise all have influences on the buildup of the cholesterol underneath the lining of the artery. Let me ask this question before I go on. How many of you knew that the cholesterol was actually beneath some lining in the artery? Did you think it was on the surface, kind of build up? Yeah, I mean, that's what most people think, but it really, this lining is critical to regulating what happens. So insulin makes that lining more permeable to the cholesterol, so that's why finding insulin resistance is so important. The small particles get through that lining more easily. If you have the corkscrew that we talked about, that pulls those particles through the lining more easily. The liver regulates all of that, and proper diet and proper exercise will create lots and lots of these large particles. And if you remember, we talked about the large ones, the big ones don't get through the lining so easily, so they are much less dangerous to your body. The small ones are the ones that are dangerous, and all of the lifestyle things that we have taught you about will change those from small to the large. You probably remember we called these the garbage of the system. And so we called the HDL, the good cholesterol, the garbage truck, because that's exactly what it does, is it goes through the lining, finds those small packets of garbage, pulls them out of the lining, and then the plaque will actually regress. So this is not an inevitable, I've got this today, I'm going to have that tomorrow, and I'm going to end up with an event. We used to think that was true as doctors, but we now have the science that absolutely proves that we can reverse this process because we now understand it better. Our carotid test measured the thickness of that lining, and that helps us to predict how quickly your arteries are aging. And if you were one of those whose arteries were aging faster than normal, we talked about the factors that we found in your blood reports and based on your exercise that were contributing to that. So that last slide really gives us our big picture of the what's. Let me spend a little more time on this. I had a model that we talked about and that is pretty ugly to look at, as a matter of fact. And as Casey was saying the other day in one of our meetings, there's a lot going on in that slide. And there is. But what I want to point out today is each of these segments is an example of the progression of plaque if you don't do anything about it, if you just let your body do what it wants to do. This is, the lining is nice and smooth, and if you notice these first 4 slides, the artery is wide open. There's great blood flow through that artery, and yet look what's happening underneath that lining is all of this cholesterol buildup. Then it finally does start to narrow the artery, and as that happens, inflammation, which is where your own body's immune system is attacking the plaque. It thinks the plaque is an invader, and it is. So it sends white blood cells in there to dissolve the plaque. That's what white blood cells do to bacteria. They find the bacteria, they engulf it, and they destroy it. They actually release bleach to destroy bacteria. That's why we use bleach to destroy bacteria. Well, our white cells make bleach. Well, what if they release bleach in the lining of an artery? That can't be good, right? Well, that's what they do. That's what the white blood cell is doing. So that's why inflammation is so dangerous, because then that starts to break down all of this stuff that's under the lining, and eventually the lining ruptures. When that happens, some of this cholesterol goes into the lining, into the artery, and then your body says, wait a minute, there's a hole in an artery, I need to stop the bleeding. And so clotting occurs. If I cut myself, the reason I stop bleeding is clotting says, hey, there's an artery that's broken, let's plug it up so we don't die. Well, unfortunately, the artery isn't broken, it's not bleeding out here, it's just ruptured here, but the body doesn't know that any different. So it just clots. And that clot quickly grows and completely blocks off the artery. And I mentioned each of you that it's the clot that kills. It's the clot that creates the heart attack. It's the clot that creates the stroke. So if we can prevent that, we prevent heart attacks and strokes. So it's not magic, it really is science. This also acts as if this is a one-time event. Here's something that we didn't talk about in the one-on-ones, is arteries that have this going on may have just a little bit of a rupture that causes a little bit of a clot, and then that clot seals it, doesn't block the artery off, but that accelerates the damage underneath the lining. So our goal is to prevent inflammation. Our goal is to cause regression of this so that we go back in this direction. As plaque narrows, as the artery narrows, the white blood cells ignore it. They're not worried about it until it gets to a certain level. So the carotid ultrasound helped us to know what was happening inside of your arteries. Teddy Roosevelt, great quote of his that applies to everybody in this room. The man who really counts in the world is the doer, not the mere critic. The man who actually does the work, even if roughly and imperfectly. Not the man who only talks or writes about how it ought to be done. We don't want you to talk about how this ought to be done. We want you to be doers, and you are doing that. And you may feel that you're doing it roughly and imperfectly. That's okay. That is okay. You'll get better and better and better. I'm better taking care of my body now than I was 10 years ago. You can ask Paul. And he's part of that because he has me on my exercise routine. So we all are trying to do this better and better.